Shalom and welcome. This is the story cycle for the Parsha Mishpatim. And this follows the portion where we see the first issuing of the Ten Commandments. And this Torah portion contains a whole series of somewhat unrelated laws, most of which have to do with how people interact with one another. So in this portion we find the laws governing Hebrew slaves. We find laws governing things like pits and who's responsible if someone or something falls in an uncovered pit. Goring oxen, which is interesting in and of itself. And a number of things. We find an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth in this portion. And we find a number of things having to do with civic welfare, like don't take things away from a widow. So it's hard to find a story related to any of this, but there is a story, the Baal Shem Tov story. And it has elements both of this law about a widow that we find in our portion, because the story concerns a widow, and it also has elements of things that can happen to someone because of mind over matter, perhaps. So the story goes that there was a man and his wife and children, and as was very common at the time of the Baal Shem Tov, he ran an inn under a contract to a landlord. The aristocracy in Eastern Europe owned a lot of land. They owned inns, they owned distillery businesses, and they would give out contracts to some of the local people to, for an annual fee, run these businesses for them. And this woman's husband had such a contract to run an inn. Well, unfortunately, as happens, the man died. But his widow took over running the inn, and she was doing a fairly good job of running the inn. She made enough money not only to pay the contract to the landlord, but to have a reasonable living for herself and her children. But one day, someone who didn't have the most savory of reputations, this story calls him Reb Feivel, decided that he wanted this inn. And so he went, without even talking to the widow, he went to the landlord and started negotiating with the landlord that the landlord should transfer the contract to him away from the widow. Well, the people in the town were incensed. How could this man deprive a widow of her income? And all the people in the town suggested that she go and see the Baal Shem Tov. So she packed up and went to see the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov listened to her troubles and said, "Let me see what I can do." So he called this Reb Feivel, and they met. And he tried to tell Reb Feivel that this wasn't proper, that you should be taking this income away from a widow. Reb Feivel, of course, since I said he's not the most, the best person in the area, thought that the Baal Shem Tov was simply mixing into his business, and he told the Baal Shem Tov, "You have no reason to be mixing in my business. I'm going to go ahead and do this anyway." And as a parting shot, he said, "You'll see, I will get this contract." The Reb Feivel decided he was going to take they take this into his hands, and he went to the landlord with a sack full of coins, and he said, "Here, I have the money as we agreed. Sign the contract over to me." The landlord opened the sack and started counting out the money, and this was even more than what they had agreed to. And he was about ready to sign this over because the landlord is interested in his profit. Well, as he's counting the coins, Reb Feivel goes, "Oh, my head, I have a headache. Oh, it's so bad, it's so bad, it's so bad." The landlord asked him if there was something he could do. He said, "Ah, no, I'll be all right in a moment." So the landlord keeps counting him. Suddenly Reb Feivel screams, "Oh, my head!" And he's moaning, and he's running around, and he starts foaming at the mouth, and he realizes he can't move. He's paralyzed. He falls down on the floor, and the landlord takes a step back, and he looks down, and he says, "Oh my God, I've gotten into business with a crazy man." So he calls his servants, and he says, "Get this person out of here." So his servants pick up Reb Feivel, and they take him to his home and unceremoniously dump him at the door. Well, his wife finds him, gets him into bed. He can't move. He's almost in a catatonic type of state. So she calls on the Baal Shem Tov, who agrees to come and see what he can do. So as the Baal Shem Tov visits this man from time to time, he starts getting a little better, a little bit at a time. And of course, the landlord keeps the contract for the inn with the widow, so her income for herself and her children is provided. But Reb Feivel's family decided they were going to call on a local sorceress to come and cure him, so the Baal Shem Tov stopped going. And Reb Feivel recovered a little bit, but not hardly what he was. So the widow's income was preserved. Now in our Torah portion it says, don't mess with the things of a widow, because God will intervene. Well, did God intervene with Reb Feivel? I don't know. Did Reb Feivel actually have a little bit of a conscience left? Maybe. But some of these things do happen from time to time. We hear about people who aren't about to do the most savory things in the world, and some misfortune befalls them. One cannot help but wonder, is the source of the misfortune intervention by God, as it says in our Torah? Or is it simply the person's conscience, which according to the prophets say, the still small voice within that takes over and prevents ill things from being done? Perhaps we'll never know. But things like this do happen. And as in our story, usually they happen to work out the way the Torah says they should. Shalom